Hide in the hall closet, and don't breathe until I come back for you. Those were the last words I expected to hear from my 72-year-old housekeeper on my daughter's graduation morning. I stood frozen in my own foyer, staring at Dorothy like she'd finally lost her grip on reality. 19 years she'd been with our family. 19 years of quiet competence, of knowing exactly where I kept the spare keys, of remembering how I took my tea. She'd raised 5 children, nursed her mother through dementia, survived a car accident that left a permanent tremor in her left hand. She wasn't the type for theatrics. "What on earth are you doing?" I whispered, my hand instinctively going to the pearl earrings my late husband Gerald had given me on our 25th anniversary. I was dressed for my daughter's graduation. My hair was perfectly arranged in 40 minutes. I was supposed to be at the University of Toronto's Convocation Hall, watching Claire receive her MBA. I'd been counting down to this moment for 3 years. Dorothy's grip tightened on my wrist. I could feel her trembling. "Please, Margaret, I found something. You need to hear it yourself. If I just tell you, you won't believe me." I wouldn't have believed me either. She was pushing me toward the coat closet off the main hallway before I could protest. "The door didn't close completely," she explained, her voice barely a breath. "I'd be able to hear everything. Don't come out until I come for you, no matter what you hear." Then she shut the door. I stood in the darkness between Gerald's old winter coat and a row of umbrellas, thinking, I am 63 years old and hiding in my own closet. Gerald would have found this hilarious, right up until he didn't. But Gerald had been gone for years now, and Dorothy had never, in nearly 2 decades, asked me to do anything without a sensible reason. So, I stayed. The front door opened. 2 sets of footsteps crossed the hardwood. I heard my daughter's voice, and that familiar swell of pride I always felt when I heard her, followed immediately by something else I couldn't yet name. She wasn't alone. "She thinks I've already left," Claire was saying. Dorothy told her the car service was coming early. "We've got about an hour." "That's enough time." The second voice was male. I recognized it instantly. It was my daughter's fiancé, Preston. Let me explain what that name meant. Preston Caldwell had been in Claire's life for 14 months. He was 30th, 2 years older than her. Handsome in that calculated way some men cultivate, the kind of handsome that opens doors before anyone decides whether to let them in. Private equity, a downtown apartment, a ski chalet. He mentioned often enough to ensure nobody forgot it. He spoke with the unshakable confidence of someone who'd decided he was the smartest person in every room. I'd watched him order wine without asking Claire's preference during our first dinner together at a restaurant on King Street. I'd filed it away in that mental drawer mothers keep for things we hope we're wrong about. Smiled. Been polite. Told myself it wasn't my marriage. The engagement had been announced 6 months ago. The wedding was scheduled for September at a vineyard in Niagara. And now he was in my house, in my hallway, and my daughter thought I wasn't home. "The trust document," he said. "Did you find where she keeps it?" Silence. Then Claire. Her office. Top drawer of the filing cabinet. "It's not locked." Something cold traveled down my spine. I made myself stand perfectly still. And the amendment she was talking about, Preston again. She mentioned it to her lawyer in March. I don't know if it's been signed yet. It needs to not be signed yet. Another silence, longer this time. I'd set up a family trust when Jero died. Nothing complicated. Designed to protect what we'd built over 31 years of marriage. A house in Rosedale. Investments. A small commercial property in Oakville that Gerald had bought in 2003. and that had appreciated significantly. When I turned 70, or if I passed before that, the trust would distribute to Claire and to our son, Thomas, who lived in Vancouver with his husband and their 2 daughters. The amendment I'd asked my lawyer Patricia to draw up was simple, a clause requiring any distribution to a married beneficiary to account for the marriage as separate from the inheritance. Standard protection. Patricia had recommended it when Claire got engaged. Preston knew about it. Somehow, Preston knew about it. If it's already signed, he was saying there were still options. It would just take longer. Claire's voice was different from the voice I knew. Flatter. I don't want it to take longer. I want this settled before the wedding. You said I know what I said. You said once we were married it was straightforward. You said Canadian law? I said it was more straightforward. Not automatic. There's a difference. Apos, if the amendment is already in place, we may need to approach it differently. A legal challenge could take years, and I'm not paying Harrington and Associates for years. I'd stopped breathing. I became aware of this when my vision started going soft at the edges. I made myself inhale slowly through my nose. Gerald's coat still smelled faintly of him, cedar and something warmer underneath, something I'd never been able to name. I pressed my fingers against the sleeve. My daughter was discussing my trust. My daughter was helping him find a way around an amendment designed to protect her own inheritance. I didn't want to understand what I was hearing. There's a part of your brain that simply refuses. The way a door refuses when someone's turned the bolt. I stood in the dark and felt my mind pushing against what my ears were giving it, trying to find another interpretation. There wasn't one. I want to see the document, Preston said. Footsteps moved down the hall, toward Gerald's old study. My office now. Then Dorothy's voice, perfectly calm, coming from the kitchen. Mr. Caldwell, can I get you something before you go? I've just made coffee. A beat. His footsteps changed direction. She was buying time. Dorothy was 62 years old and running interference in my hallway like she'd been trained for it. I stood in that closet for 23 more minutes. I counted them by the clock I couldn't see, measuring seconds the way you do when you have nothing else to hold on to. I heard Preston's voice and Dorothy's voice from the kitchen, a conversation I couldn't make out. Pleasantries stretched thin. I heard Claire moving in the office, the soft slide of a filing cabinet drawer. When Dorothy finally opened the closet door, she didn't say a word. She just looked at me, and her eyes asked if I was all right. I shook my head, very slightly. I wasn't. She reached out and straightened my pearl earring, which had turned crooked in the dark. Then she handed me my coat. I need to go back to the beginning, or rather, to where the story truly starts, which isn't with me standing in a dark closet. It starts with Dorothy. She'd started seeing things in March. She told me everything that afternoon, after Preston's car left the driveway. We sat at the kitchen table with the coffee she'd made as a decoy still sitting between us. She told me in that methodical, careful way she did everything. The phone calls first. Preston had been at the house in March for Sunday dinner. Claire had started bringing him regularly by then. Dorothy was clearing the table when she heard him in the front sitting room, speaking in a low voice. She hadn't meant to listen. She'd simply been walking past. The trust is structured around Ontario legislation. If we're inside the marriage when distributions happen, the standard application would include, and then he'd lowered his voice further, and she'd lost the thread. She filed it away, unsure what it meant, telling herself maybe she'd misheard. Then, in April, she'd taken a phone message for Claire. Preston asking Claire to call him back. Nothing unusual. But when she'd written the message on the notepad, She'd pressed down harder than usual. When she tore the sheet off, the impression on the page below was still there. She hadn't read it on purpose. She'd just seen it. A name, Harrington and Associates, and a number. She'd looked them up. Estate litigation specialists. In May, she'd heard Claire on the phone in the garden. Dorothy had been upstairs with the window open. She'd heard two things clearly. She trusts me completely, and she won't see it coming. Dorothy had sat down on the edge of the guest bed and stayed there a long time. She'd asked herself whether she was being foolish, whether her fondness for me was making her suspicious of a young man who might simply be having a normal conversation about finances. She decided she needed more before she came to me. What she found in the 3 weeks since was enough. Preston Caldwell had been married before. Not briefly, not in his early 20s, married for 6 years, to a woman in Calgary. The divorce had been finalized 18 months before he met Claire. It involved a protracted legal dispute over his former wife's inheritance from her mother. Dorothy had found the court records through a public database. Preston hadn't won, but he delayed the final settlement long enough that his ex-wife's legal costs had consumed a significant portion of what she'd been entitled to. He'd done this before, not identically, but the outline was the same. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the pages Dorothy had printed at the public library. She didn't own a printer, she said, and she hadn't wanted to use mine in case I came home and saw them. I felt something shift inside me that I don't think has ever shifted back. My daughter wasn't being deceived. She was participating. I want to be careful here, because she is still my daughter, and I am still her mother. And those are not small things. I thought about who she'd been at 7, and 15, and 22. When Gerald got his diagnosis and she drove 4 hours from Ottawa without being asked because she'd heard something in my voice on the phone. I thought about the person I believed her to be. Then I thought about she trusts me completely and she won't see it coming. I let myself sit with both things at the same time. It was one of the hardest things a mother can do. I didn't go to the graduation ceremony. I called Patricia from my bedroom. The amendment hadn't been signed yet. We had a meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday. She listened in her professionally trained silence, then said, "Margaret, I need you to come in first thing tomorrow morning." She also gave me the name of a family lawyer she trusted. I called Thomas in Vancouver. That was the hardest call. He asked me 3 times if I was sure, and I said yes all 3 times. Then he was quiet for a long moment and said, "What do you need from me?" I loved him so much in that moment I couldn't speak. I asked Dorothy if she'd stay for dinner. She said she'd already started soup. The graduation ceremony ended by 4. I know because Claire called me at 4:15, cheerful and clear-voiced, telling me about the reception, asking if I was feeling better, since Dorothy had told her I'd had a headache and hadn't been able to make it. She mentioned Preston had surprised her with a reservation for dinner. She said she wished I could have been there. I said I was sorry I'd missed it. We'd celebrate soon. I said I loved her, which was true even then. She said she loved me too, which I chose to believe. I spent the following week moving carefully. Patricia advised me not to change my behavior. Don't cancel the wedding venue. Don't mention what I knew. Don't alert Claire that anything had shifted. Patricia and the family lawyer, a woman named Diane Reeves, who wore no jewelry and asked questions like scalpels, advised that I needed documentation, a paper record of what had happened and what had been said before I made any move. Dorothy had kept everything. Every printout, every note. She'd also, it turned out, written herself a private log since May. Dates, times, what she'd heard, what she'd found. She'd done this, as she told me simply, because she'd hoped she'd never need to show it to me. But she'd wanted to be thorough, just in case. 19 years. She'd worked for us for 19 years, and I hadn't until that week fully understood what that meant. I signed the trust amendment on a Tuesday morning. Patricia expedited it. I also restructured the trust itself on Diane's recommendation, making any legal challenge considerably more difficult and considerably less rewarding. It wasn't designed to disinherit Claire. It was designed to protect what Gerald and I had built from someone who decided to treat it as a transaction. On Wednesday, I called Claire and asked her to come for lunch on Saturday. I spent Thursday and Friday deciding what kind of mother I wanted to be. I'm not a person who performs grief. Gerald used to say that about me, admiringly, though occasionally, with a hint of frustration, that I processed things internally, quietly, and emerged on the other side with a decision already made. He was louder in his emotions, more willing to say the difficult thing in the difficult moment. I used to think I was more rational. Now I think we were just different. I thought about what Claire had said. I thought about Preston's ex-wife in Calgary, who had probably been someone's daughter too. I decided I wasn't going to ambush Claire. I wasn't going to perform righteous anger, not because I didn't feel it. I felt it like something physical, something I had to breathe around. But because I've learned that the moments when you most want to make someone feel the weight of what they've done are usually the moments when it's least useful to try. I wanted my daughter back. I wasn't sure I could have her, but I knew I couldn't reach her through a confrontation that would let her put up walls and tell herself I was the problem. Claire arrived at 12:30 on Saturday. She brought flowers, yellow tulips, the ones she knew I liked. She hugged me in the doorway, and she smelled like her shampoo, the same kind she'd used since university. I held on a moment longer than usual. Dorothy made lunch and then excused herself to visit her sister, because Dorothy understood things without being told. We sat at the kitchen table, and I let Claire talk about the wedding for 20 minutes. The venue was confirmed. The dress had been altered. Preston's family was flying in from Edmonton. She was considering peonies for the centerpieces because roses felt too expected. I listened. I let her be happy, or perform happiness, or let the space exist where I could no longer tell the difference. Then I said, I need to tell you about some changes I've made to your father's trust. She went still, not dramatically, just the way a person goes still when something they were expecting and trying not to expect finally arrives. I told her clearly and without accusation. The amendment had been signed, the structure updated. I told her the name of the firm Preston had been researching. I watched her face while I said it. She didn't deny it. That was the thing I hadn't been prepared for. I'd prepared for anger, for tears, for defensive deflection. What I got was something quieter and in some ways worse. She looked down at her tulips and was very still and said nothing. I'm not telling you this to end your relationship, I said. I'm telling you because I love you and because I think you've been told something or told yourself something that isn't true about him, about what this is. She looked up then. He said you would never understand. Her voice was careful, measured. He said you'd always found a way to keep the money close, to keep control. I know, I said. That's the story that makes what you did make sense. She flinched. I slid the folder across the table. Inside was a copy of the Calgary court records, the years of Preston's first marriage. His ex-wife's name was Sandra. The documentation of what the litigation had cost her. Claire didn't open it, but she didn't push it away. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The kind of silence that with some people would feel like a wall going up. With Claire, I'd always been able to tell the difference. She had a quality she'd had since she was small. A willingness to sit inside something uncomfortable rather than fill it. I'd always considered it one of her best qualities. I let her sit in it. I didn't know about Sandra, she finally said. I know you didn't. He wouldn't have told you. He made it sound like it was about protecting us, about protecting what we'd build together. He has money, Mom. He doesn't need yours. Then why, the lawyer? I asked quietly. Not as an attack. She didn't answer. I told her I'd made my calls. The trust was protected, not as a punishment, but as something her father and I had built for her and Thomas and their children. I intended to keep it that way. I told her I wasn't asking her to leave Preston. That was her decision, and it would remain her decision. And I wouldn't pretend I could make it for her. I told her I was her mother and I intended to stay her mother, and that was not contingent on what she decided. She left 2 hours later with the folder under her arm. I stood at the front window and watched her car go down the street, and I thought about Gerald the way I always do when something happens I would have needed to tell him. He used to say the hardest thing about loving someone was accepting you couldn't carry everything for them, couldn't always step in front of what was coming. He'd tried with his illness. He hadn't wanted me to see him diminished, and I'd stood my ground and watched him anyway, because that was my right as the person who loved him most. Dorothy came back at 4 with butter tarts from the bakery on Mount Pleasant. That's the kind of woman she is. We sat at the kitchen table again and drank tea and didn't talk much, which was exactly right. 3 weeks later, Claire called to tell me the wedding was postponed. She didn't say cancelled, she said postponed. I didn't ask for more than she was ready to give. She came for dinner the following Sunday. Just the two of us. She brought wine, Ontario Riesling, a good one, from a vineyard near Niagara where we'd gone on a trip when she was 17. I don't know if she remembered that, or if it was coincidence. Either way, I chose to take it as something. We didn't talk about Preston. We talked about Thomas's daughters, who were 6 and 9 and had just started skating lessons. We talked about a book we'd both read. We talked about Jero, the way we were able to sometimes now, without the rawness, just the memories sitting with us at the table like a welcome guest. At the end of the night, when she was putting on her coat, she turned to me in the hallway and said, I didn't tell him anything after March, Mom. I want you to know that. When I started to see it, I stopped. I looked at her for a moment. Why didn't you come to me? She was quiet. I think I was ashamed. I pulled her into a hug in the doorway. This time, she was the one who held on longer. I don't know what happens after this. I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that I don't know what happens after this isn't the frightening thing I used to think it was. Gerald taught me that. The last year of his life taught me most of the things worth knowing. What I know is this. I have a daughter who is in some complicated and incomplete way finding her way back to herself. I have a lawyer who wears no jewelry and asks questions like scalpels. I have a trust that is protected. I have a son in Vancouver who calls every Sunday. And I have a housekeeper who has worked for my family for 19 years, who printed court records at the public library and kept a private log in a notebook she hoped I'd never need to see, who made soup when I couldn't eat and bought butter tarts when words weren't enough. There is a kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up quietly in the hallway and tells you to get in the closet and trust it. I did. And it was the most important thing I could have done. There is a kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up quietly. The hardest thing about loving someone is accepting. You can't carry everything for them. If you're listening to this and you have someone in your life who's shown up for you that quietly, that steadily, without being asked, I hope you know what you have. I didn't fully. Until I was standing in the dark, between a winter coat and a row of umbrellas, counting seconds I couldn't see. I do now. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Karma Court Files for more stories of justice served cold. Drop a comment below. I want to know what you would have done in that closet.